Parag Khanna is an accomplished traveler and world explorer. Born in India, he's visited 100 countries on all continents. His keen insight on the world we live in is one of the reasons he's a senior research fellow in the Center on Asia and Globalization at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore. He's a best-selling author whose recent book, Connectography, Mapping the Future of Global Civilization, explores megacities, emerging global networks, and the shifting power dynamics of our planet. I sat down with him at the Aspen Ideas Festival, one of the largest annual gatherings of thought leaders and innovators, and had a conversation about the crucial nature of connecting. Take a look. You were on a panel earlier today, and I wanted to use the words of the moderator because I thought it was really interesting how he described what you're talking about. A rewiring of governance, nation states not as important as hubs. And I've seen you make this argument that if you get too focused on within your borders, that you're missing out on opportunities. And I think the example you gave is, what if you looked at a hub at Toronto down through Detroit, that right. If you were in Michigan and you looked at it that way instead of inside right. your borders, right. you might be able to revive a city like Detroit.
So there's a perfect example of a rewiring that's missing, because I'm talking about the need for a Chicago-Toronto corridor with Detroit in the middle, but that corridor doesn't exist. So that's the problem, because you see an opportunity for there to be a new wiring, a new infrastructure, new connectivity across the border that would benefit everyone along that corridor on both sides of the border. But it doesn't exist yet, and whenever I see those opportunities, those missed opportunities, especially in that case, because as you know, in that example, Canada has offered to subsidize the entire Ambassador Bridge that would serve as a second major artery for the most heavily transited border in the world, the most important and voluminous trade relationship on Earth. And Canada's offering us to build the bridge, and we're not moving forward with it for our own political reasons and bureaucracy. So that's maddening. But to David's point about the rewiring of the world, it's the rewiring that is happening. Governments have made it happen. They've been investing in it. Companies have made it happen. Everyone, it's our collective activity. Globalization is the sum total of everything that we do, not just governments.
Some people hear what you say and embrace it, and yet there still is this element in society, and maybe you can talk about this, that really they don't want any part of this. It frightens them. And you have a candidate, Donald Trump, who says, I'm going to erect a wall. They like that. This is additional borders. What is it that frightens people about what you're talking about?
Okay, so Donald Trump was just celebrating the opening of his newest golf course, or some old golf course in Scotland. The guy has assets around the world. You cannot tell me that he doesn't favor globalization. You almost don't even have a right to oppose globalization intellectually, because as a fact, it has elevated everyone's standard of living as a whole. Not just their per capita income, because we know wages haven't grown, but there's so many things about the problems of inequality in American society where we blame globalization, we blame China, we blame Mexico, we blame everyone but ourselves, everyone but bad politics and bad policy. Meanwhile, for the last 15, 20 years, when other countries have seen jobs being outsourced and lost, they have retrained their workers, they have invested, they have forced companies to invest locally and move people up the value chain. We didn't do that. It's our fault. It's not Mexico's fault. It is, in fact, our fault. So, yes, people have a right to be populist, to be nativist, to be angry, but they should be directing their anger at Washington, at Wall Street, whatever the case may be. But you can't really blame the foreign partners, your trade partners, your largest trade partners, who you voted for governments to sign these agreements with. And we are a democratic society, so we should blame our own ignorance on top of everything else. It is certainly true that there is a lot of unfair aspects of trade deals. Some dimensions of trade deals never should have gone forward. But you don't just say, I'm going to rip up the trade deal. We live in a world of reciprocity. So whether your name is Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, it is very, very self-defeating to rock the the system as much as they talk about doing. Fortunately, I actually have faith in the democratic system to some degree, and I believe that historically, no matter what people say when they're campaigning, when they get elected, they tend to moderate their positions.
So you talk about cities as always being there, always vitally important. Nation states, not so much so. Talk to us about that.
Right. Well, cities are what I call today the islands of stability, or the islands of governance. Many cities around the world have become the magnetic hubs for the world economy, for talent. Most of the world population now lives in cities. And in fact, what has always been the case is that cities are our fundamental social and infrastructural unit. They are thousands of years old. Our first sort of urban habitats were developed 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. Over that last, those millennia, empires have risen and fallen, nations come and go, the city is always there. And today the city is larger and more powerful than ever. There are 50 mega cities that more or less dominate the world economy, 600 cities in total that are far more powerful. You can't have a successful country without successful cities. So we should really think of ourselves as a network civilization among cities that drive the world economy. No matter what country you may or may not belong to. And there's a lot of evidence for this. Another data point just being the fact that there are cities that are really capitals of entire regions, like Lagos, Nigeria, or Nairobi in Kenya. These are not just national capitals. Lagos isn't even the capital of Nigeria. Anyway, these are entire regional hubs. The entire economy of many countries depends on one city. Singapore in Southeast Asia is the smallest country geographically in Southeast Asia, but the wealthiest country. Almost 75% of the foreign investment that goes into the ASEAN region of 700 million people is routed through a tiny little island of 5 million people. So you can't just say that, oh, well, that's just a little dot. If you look at the role that a place plays in global flows and connectivity, then your measurement of its power would be far more significant than simply looking at its territorial size. And that's the shift we're going into today.
Let me, I want to touch on one thing that you say. Forces of connection will overwhelm the forces of division. And yet it seems as though we see example after example of division in the news, that migrants moving, you see the Brexit vote, we've already talked about Donald Trump. How does it overwhelm it?
Mm-hmm. Well, because it already has. The phenomena you're describing are responses to the overwhelming flows and connectivity that we've had. 1 million migrants entered Europe last year and are now residing in Europe. So if there is a movement to slow down the flow of immigrants, that does not mean that friction has won. It means that friction is trying to reassert itself in light of massive, overwhelming volumes of flows. And by the way, that's a good thing. I never said that I'm for, again, a borderless world or for unfettered migration. That doesn't make any sense. These countries, especially the smaller ones, are having a very hard time coping. Let them slow down. Let them figure out where they're going to house migrants, how they're going to employ them, what their strategies are. They're very slow at doing that. This has caught them off guard. So I think that some degree of friction is a very good thing.
As a world traveler, as a guy who's been out there watching all of this, mapping it all out, when it comes to connectivity, as you look at the landscape, who's getting it right?
Well, cities, for sure. So cities, in this day and age, in classical geopolitics, it's all about territorial expansion, right? Today, I argue it's about infrastructure and supply chain control and market access. China doesn't really want to be any bigger. It doesn't want more mouths to feed. It has 1.5 billion people, right? So it's not about expanding your size. It's about controlling market access and making sure that you're absorbing sufficient resources and capital to care for your population. On the city scale, it's a lot easier. You have fewer people, and you have lots of flows of capital coming in. So smaller places, or places that are lucky enough to already be small, have a kind of good fortune that we never appreciated in the Cold War or in previous geopolitical eras, because it's a very dangerous situation to be small and weak. You could be conquered. But now it's sort of countries like Switzerland, like Singapore, or city-statelets like Dubai. We say, well, they're actually really lucky. They don't have that many mouths to feed. They have open economies. They're bringing in lots of money. It's less stuff to have to deal with and juggle. So those places are actually rather fortunate, provided that they're well governed. And the thing is that cities learn from other cities faster than countries are learning from other countries. So cities are looking at what Dubai and Singapore do, is saying, what are the 10 things that city is doing that I can do in the next 6 months? And I'm going to go there, study it, learn it, and go do it. And that's why cities are the engines of progress.
So reorganizing the United States of America into the United States of America, how would that look?
Right. So first and foremost, that idea is a layering of what America already is, which is natural, organic, economic gravities of food production, of energy, of our historical centers of manufacturing, of our strong areas for services and capital, right? These are the either rural or resource-rich or urban clusters that need to be better connected to each other so that the bounty of America can be better shared across America. What's the point of sharing a country if you can't share the resources across it because the infrastructure is so bad? So I emphasize the fact that the urban centers should be connected to each other and the resources should be better connected. And you can only do that through better transportation corridors, energy corridors, and so forth. The most important thing to point out is that a lot of people view that approach to remapping America as neglecting the forgotten rural populations or the second-tier populations. To the contrary, I would like to know what you will do for the people of Appalachia or the people of South Dakota or the people of Nebraska, if not what I am describing. How will you help them if you are not going to build that connectivity that passes through their geography so they can benefit from it? So the map that I've put forward in the book is really meant to benefit the people of the second-tier towns of Ohio and the people of Idaho. They're the ones who are going to win. The cities are already winning. So I just want to be clear that this is a map for all Americans, even if I'm calling it the United City-States of America. I'm calling it that because the main connective arteries are connecting the major cities.
You just got back, in fact, you just came in from China.
Yeah.
This message that you have, I would imagine, is very well received there. It seems to me China has a different kind of more outward-looking view with the Belt and Road Initiative,
yes,
the Silk Road Initiative. Yeah. It seems as though they kind of get it, and the borders don't seem to matter. We've got to move around. We're all interconnected. What are your thoughts?
So China is benefiting from more and more connectivity. It was a very poor country. It opens its economy. It brought in global supply chains, built up huge trade surpluses and currency reserves. Now it's a capital exporter. All of these things show that China has benefited from the recent decades of globalization. Now it wants to expand its sort of pathways outward physically through this infrastructure, through the One Belt, One Road initiative, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. It's perfectly logical from a geopolitical standpoint because China has 14 neighbors, more than any country in the world. Does it want to fight a war with any of those neighbors? No. So how is it going to gain influence over them? How is it going to gain access to not only to their markets, but the markets lying to the west of those markets, stretching all the way to Europe? It has to do so through infrastructure. So the One Belt, One Road is actually brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
So are other countries at a disadvantage because they don't seem to get it, do you think, that they're not as aggressive?
Well, there's intellectual shortcomings, there's wealth shortcomings, there's geographical shortcomings, right? When you say get it, actually, I could say it in two senses of the term. There are countries that just aren't getting the infrastructure and the resources because they're still landlocked. China is doing a lot to actually reach those countries and connect them with fiber optic cables, with railways stretching into Central Africa, for example. But then there's the intellectual approach, which is very significant for us right now in an election year where we're still using the language of containing China and so forth. Well, we're doing the right thing by having a military presence in East Asia that reinforces the idea of military stability and balance. What we need to do beyond that is to encourage the countries in the region to form their own security apparatus, their own regional peacemaking agreements for the preservation of their own stability so that their economies can grow. But you cannot contain the One Belt, One Road. Right? It is a terrestrial project, and America is on the other side of the planet, separated from Eurasia by two oceans. Nor should you want to. My challenge to anyone in Washington today is, why did you oppose European countries joining the Asia Infrastructure and Investment Bank? Infrastructure is a global public good. Most of the world's countries were born after 1945. They're post-colonial countries. They are small, they are poor, they are weak, they have dilapidated infrastructure. Their populations have doubled or tripled in the last 50 or 60 years. The one thing they need desperately more than anything else in the world is infrastructure. In fact, many of them view it as more important than our provision of security to them or for them, or on par. And we intellectually failed to grasp that. So we tried to encourage our allies not to join this institution. But of course they did. Every single one of them turned their back on the Obama administration and joined this bank. And now they're launching projects all over. Just new projects have been announced. Housing in Indonesia, power projects in Bangladesh, roads in Tajikistan, a road corridor in Pakistan. Why would you oppose these things? These are desperately poor countries. What are we doing for them that could possibly substitute for what this bank is going to do? Absolutely nothing.
So the future's here. You can either fear it or embrace it.
Yes.
It's as simple as that. We'll leave it there. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll find out how shattering cultural myths and misconceptions fosters understanding.